Alrighty. I mean, it's a pretty simple argument to make. I don't think I'll need the 3 minutes. First of all, thank you, everybody, for being here for this important topic. Um, this is this is a concept that stood for a while. Is that people who are likely to break the law, people who are engaging in unlawful activity, um, we should be a little bit cautious about who can get a gun. But when it comes to drugs specifically, it's not just the 20% of people who are committing gun-related murders who actually have cocaine in their system. Very small percent, maybe 4% who have opioids in their system. But something like 40% of gun homicides are related to drug drug trafficking. And you might say, okay, but those are dealers; those aren't users. User dealers are much more common than I think a lot of people realize. These aren't two totally distinct populations. A poll looking at uh, meth users specifically, something like 30% were user dealers. So they had dealt meth within a couple months while being users. And this is actually pretty common for low-level dealers, is that they're dealing in order to fund their supply. And even if they don't start that way, then they end up dealing at some point. And so if you're taking drugs, you're impaired, you're dealing drugs, you're dealing in drug trafficking and gang wars potentially over turf, people getting jacked for drugs. At some point, firearms are going to be involved, and either those people or innocent people on the sidelines are going to be caught up in it. So if you're already engaging in hardcore drugs, you're likely to be dealing drugs, then the idea that we should restrict this population from owning firearms seems pretty straightforward. Thank you.
Okay, so I want to be sure here. Are you conflating drug trafficking and drug users on a whole?
I'm not conflating in the sense that I'm misattributing one to the other. I'm stating as a fact that the overlap in these populations is very high.
Okay, so there's a noticeable overlap. So even
Mhm.
in that noticeable overlap, are a majority of people that are using the drug also trafficking?
It's a little bit hard to get exact estimates. It's probably not a majority, but when we say not a majority, it's something like if it's something like 30 or 40%, technically, that's less than 50%, but the percent of people who are not in that population who are likely to be kind of using firearms for gang related activity, nefarious purposes is very, very low. So it's a huge spike, even though it's not technically a majority.
So I just want to be sure that you think that 30 to 40%, which is probably well above what it actually is a good enough reason to bar people from their Second Amendment rights.
Well, what's the I don't know, for cross examination? Am I allowed to rebut a little bit? How do you demonstrate that's an unrealistic number?
Oh, we're
Uh,
ballparking. You made the claim. I just don't think the claim actually meets anything that I can see on record. I'd be more than happy to accept any evidence that you have
mhm.
for what this number is, but I just don't
Yeah.
think that's a realistic number.
No, I mean, this was from this study. You can look it up. It's on NIH. High on my own supply. Correlates of drug dealing among heterosexually identified methamphetamine users. So, I mean, this is study with robust kind of controls, doing statistical analysis, and a lot of other psychological factors. But no, I mean, this seems that I can send you the source if that's helpful.
Oh, that'd definitely be helpful because I would sincerely doubt that out of all drug users, 30 to
I don't know if
40% of
there's a
them
source
are
in the chat.
also trafficking. That's
Well, this
wild
this was
to even
looking at
consider.
methamphetamine specifically. I don't know if that's true for all cases,
Well, we're
but
talking like all Schedule One drugs here. Like we're not just
Mhm.
talking one specific drug. So, with that being the case, when you go to gang wars and other situations like that, are these people not also involved in other black market dealings that would pretty much lead to some form of violence anyway?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, if you're taking these kind of hard street drugs, you're likely to be involved in all these kinds of dangerous activity, and having guns in that mix makes it much more deadly.
Okay. So for the idea of removing Second Amendment rights from any Schedule One drug user, not somebody that's been convicted, to just say like, hey, maybe we should have drug tests for people that are trying to get firearms, is, I want to say, an affront to the Second Amendment. There's no test or anything on that order that is constitutionally allowed for this particular thing. So if they wanted to do that, there would have to be something passing it legally. So then going down the line, for the most part, anybody that is convicted of anything going down the line in this order would already be barred from being able to own a firearm. And that would go well beyond just using said drug. These are other laws that are being enforced. So I would say the issue would be more, we need to pay more attention to people that are domestic abusers, people that have actually committed violent crimes. Those people, I would say, would fall under what would be red flag laws, and this would be something that would subject them to not being able to own firearms. If you've not been convicted of any violent crime, I want to see what the correlative would be to say that these people should lose their ability to own firearms. And with that, I yield my time.
So, Lethe, if that's your name. Um, do you believe that first, second, and any constitutional rights are done to an absolute?
An absolute, no, I don't understand what you mean by that.
Like, okay, the First Amendment. Do you think you have an absolute right to the First Amendment?
Yes.
Okay. Why are there exceptions to that rule and say yelling fire in a theater or something? Why are
So
such things like
it,
slander have legal consequences?
at all times, we take these particular amendments to the Constitution and we put them up to court to see how they are upheld and how they are being actualized. You still have access to the First Amendment, and it's not abridged by anything. But to be able to go, and I believe you can yell fire in a crowded theater legally under court ruling. But primarily, the First Amendment is intended to guarantee your freedom of speech against the government unless you are actually threatening the government openly, or hate speech or violent acts toward the government. So I don't see where you would
Which are
lose
still
that.
exceptions to First Amendment. If you are still saying, like, calling for violence, is that not a, like, is that not an exception?
No, I don't think it's an exception. That's exactly what the First Amendment was intended for.
Okay,
Freedom
but
of
then
speech
for
is
the
not
Second
freedom from
Amendment,
consequences.
if your mental reasoning is in any way like hindered by things you do in your day-to-day life, or even through mental health reasonings, do you think that could be deemed an exception to a Second Amendment ruling?
Say that one more time.
If your mental reasonings are hindered anyway through mental health or anything like that, do you think that's an exception to uh, the Second Amendment?
Only once you've been opened up to a mental health evaluation, and if that evaluation shows positive that you are a danger to yourself and others, yes, you could lose your ability to use the Second Amendment, but not
Okay,
one
so
second
how is
before that.
okay? Say you have a history of drug use and you are mentally hindered by excessive drug use and addiction. Do you think that does fall under the same hindrance you would have on your mental health?
I don't think this is how that works. So you're saying that the drug use and the mental illness are the same
No,
thing, or
no,
are you
I'm
saying that these are
asking a
two
question.
different
I'm not
things?
saying anything.
Okay, I'm
No,
trying to
I'm
understand the
asking.
question.
I'm more asking, hey, what's the logic behind not having a gun for mental health reasons, and how is it different from drug use?
So you are not mentally compromised just in using a drug. You would need to show that the drug or the person themselves have been mentally compromised to the point where they are a danger to themselves and others specifically before anything would be done.
I I'm gonna probably make the argument that unlike what Lethe said, I think there is a reasonable argument to say that people are reasonably impacted by drug use, even if it is recreational, in a sense that is similar to mental health reasonings. A good percentage of drug violence is caused by not drug violence, gun violence is caused by drug use or drug users. About 25% of crime by the Justice Bureau in 2020 was solely based off of people who were in consumption of drugs or alcohol at that time. Um, I think that there's a good argument to say, hey, we need a lot of clarity and we need a lot of good judgment when it comes to who can own a gun and who is ready and proper to own a gun. I think a lot of the steps we take with red flag laws and where Lethe has described where we've taken with mental health follow with drug use. And I feel like the exceptions he makes are broad enough to say you're going to need to flesh that out later on in the not cross exam, the back and forth, whatever Radish calls it. Um, that's basically my argument. It's short and sweet.
So, Gameboy, let me ask you something. Do you think that the mental health of of any drug user is sufficiently sufficiently impaired that they should be prohibited from owning a firearm, bar none?
Can you repeat that one more time?
Do you believe that the mental health of any illicit drug user is sufficiently impaired to prevent them from owning a firearm, bar none?
What do you mean by mental health? Like the things that lead to drug use to that level?
No, the things that lead to, because you indicated in your opening that the connection between mental health issues and drug use was sufficient to remove someone's ability to
No,
own a gun.
well,
So,
that's not what I meant. I meant
okay.
more in the sense of the arguments we make for mental health being a precept for taking away someone's gun use, and we say, okay, we got a mental health epidemic in the U.S. This is a big problem. We need to handle this. We need to make sure that the people who are, for example, a law of like involuntarily being put into a mental asylum, people who fall under that category, you can't have a firearm. Well, okay. The same argument should be made for people who have had a history with Schedule 1 drugs. If you have a problem with Schedule 1 drugs, we see a correlation between that and gun violence the same we do with mental health, because both require a hindrance of your clarity and your judgment whenever it comes to owning a gun.
So do you believe that even a single usage of a Schedule 1 drug should be enough to disqualify someone?
I think it's really, really hard to simply say, okay, one usage of, like most cases where we know someone has a history or has had a past with Schedule 1 drugs, we don't simply say it based off of one usage of it, because it's even hard to find someone who voluntarily says, okay, I've done this before, because most Schedule 1 drugs are illegal. How are you going to
So then
possibly
what would be your
document, okay,
line?
he's used? I think if you've had a conviction of Schedule 1 drugs in your possession or distributing, I think that is a clear indicator of that, one example, but that is a good indicator of, hey, they have a history with this substance.
Okay, so if
Would you not
someone is
agree with that?
arrested for carrying, you know, a few ounces of pot in a state where that's not legal, you think from that point on they should be disallowed from owning a gun?
I think you can make an argument of how bad pot is, but given the precedent of how we view Schedule 1 drugs, I think it is a good law and principle to be taken further. I mean, I'm pretty sure both people on my team don't think that that's necessarily a harmful drug, but it is still documented under Schedule 1, along with psychedelics and heroin, which is the main crux of argument.
So I think the affirmative's issue here is that what they are arguing for is just much too broad, because Schedule 1 drugs incorporate a lot of different types, because the drug schedule is just at a scheduling category. You have so many different substances categorized under Schedule 1, many of which have little to no correlation with mental health, psychoses, schizophrenia, any of the typical mental health disorders that we might correlate with needing to be restricted from gun ownership. So the problem here is that it is much too broad. I might agree that something like heroin or methamphetamine or drugs of those types, which significantly tend to increase instances of violent behavior among those with substance use disorder or people with long histories, but things like psychedelics, PCP, LSD, and to a lesser degree cannabis have very little overlap or correlation with violent behavior of any sort. So I think that the affirmative's position here is absurd on its face, simply because it is too broad. It is not taking into account the multitude of different effects and impacts drugs that happen to be on Schedule 1 can produce. And I think part of this problem is that Schedule 1 itself is not a reasonable category in which to put drugs, simply because it is based on what therapeutic effects the government happens to recognize for those at the time, and we have often seen that government lags quite far behind actual therapeutic uses.
Yeah, so AnCom, you mentioned PCP specifically and said that it in the list of drugs that don't mirror any mental health disorders of people that we wouldn't want to have, people that have to own a gun. Do you know what the effects of PCP are?
The effects of PCP are largely those of hallucinations and other psychedelic effects.
It's more than that. It's hallucinations, delusions, agitation, blunted affect, disorganization of thought, and the effects are very frequently considered similar to schizophrenia. Same with LSD. LSD also has similar effects. So do you think it's okay for somebody who is not able to reason properly to have access to a firearm?
If they have been proven to be a danger to themselves or others, sure. But I don't think just using it should be sufficient for that, mainly because the effects as you describe them are extremely varied. Yes, we can go over the ideas of them being related, the hallucinations, the delusions, things of that nature. But the nature of those effects is extremely varied and not something that you can take based off just the fact that they've used that drug.
So do you think, like, while somebody is actually physically on the drug, do you think they should be able to have access to a firearm?
That would largely depend on the effect they're having at the time.
So if they're having a relatively mild effect, like, so if somebody's tripping on LSD and they're like just like seeing colors, you'd be fine with them having a firearm at that time?
I doubt they're likely to do anything harmful at that point.
So, like, what if their trip turns from seeing colors to seeing fucking monsters and, like, seeing fucking zombies?
If that is the way the trip goes, then yes, I might be concerned that they have access to a firearm in that instance.
Yeah, so, like, isn't the whole point of regulating firearms and to keep them away from people that can potentially do harm? Isn't the point to prevent that before it happens?
The point is to balance the civil right of owning and being able to keep a firearm for various reasons against the probability and likelihood of that violent behavior.
Yeah, so if you care about gun violence, the way to limit gun violence, it has not and never will be to ban guns in America. The solution is and always will be to limit who has access to them. Preventing the users and addicts of inhibiting substances from having access to guns is one of those methods to limiting access. Drugs and alcohol users are 4 to 10 times more likely to commit violent acts. This shows that drug and alcohol users increase the risk of violent tendencies, or drug and alcohol use increase the risk of violent tendencies. Simply put, we do not want we don't want guns in the hands of violent people. Why does drug use increase the risk of violent behaviors? Because stimulants, hallucinogens can trigger acute psychosis, delusions, cause people to lose touch with reality. Simply put, there are plenty of avoidable deaths that would have been prevented had we had stricter rules on drug use and the possession of firearms. There's a significant link between abuse and drug use. 25 to 50% of men who commit domestic violence have substance abuse disorder. 80% of child abuse cases involve the use of drugs and alcohol. We can sit here and pretend that allowing a community of people that have a higher risk of violence than the average person is okay, but in reality, this would just increase the rate of deadly violence within our communities. How does drugs affect the crime rate? 30% of violent crimes that are committed by people on drugs. 41% of violent crimes against college students are committed by people on drugs. 40% of sexual assaults committed against college students are committed by people on drugs. And then finally, 40% of people in state prisons and jails report being on drugs at the time of their offense. How do we enforce keeping guns away from drug users? Simply, there's 2 layers to it. One we already do, which is if you are in possession of a gun while you're in possession of drugs or on drugs, you go to jail. The second way, we need to require drug tests and alcohol testing in order to purchase a firearm. Drugs and alcohol users are 4 to 10 times more likely to commit violence, as I've already stated. This shows that drug use has an increase of violent tendencies. If you care about decreasing gun violence, you should not want guns in the hands of people who are impaired.
All right. Hey, Vigilante, how you doing?
Buddy? I'm good.
I have a few questions, okay? So when it comes to measuring crime in a general population versus police, or a crime that is police adjacent, as in doesn't have some basic statistical errors in it, do you think the data that you just presented when it comes to drug users having violent crime rates, do you think it's going to be free of that? Do you think it's going to have no sample selection bias, no collider bias, no detection bias?
I mean, considering that the statistics that I was using come from the DOJ and are specifically about people
but they're
who have
about
gotten
crime.
caught. Yeah, they're about crime.
They're when
specifically
crime
about
is
people that have
happening,
gotten
though, right?
caught.
Yeah, they're when crime is happening.
Yeah, they're
So, like, does your
after
evidence
crime
rely on
has already
arrests or
committed.
official records rather than self-reported offending?
It would rely on official records.
And that would be susceptible to something like a selection bias or, a base rate distortion or all of those statistical things we just talked about, right?
Yes.
So if both drug presence in suspicious circumstances increase the chance of arrest, why doesn't conditioning on arrest inflate the correlation you're claiming?
Because so we don't necessarily test for if somebody is on drugs whenever they're arrested.
I know, but all of your
depending on
data
what-
is using police records and official records to try and say that Schedule 1 drug users are violent, right?
Not all of it. One of the sources is a survey among people who are already in jail that directly state that they were on drugs at the time of their arrest.
At the time of their arrest, yeah, that's so. My last question:
Well,
can you source an underlying criminality from just an enforcement intensity?
So I mean, if we were talking about like drug use in general, like yeah, that's going to have a higher
Well, your argument is that
enforcement
it
intensity,
does,
but
right? But we would see this outside of just crime records, then, right?
no, my argument is that okay. I mean, the statistics that I was using specifically are
Mhm.
yes,
It's
talking about
conditioned on
people
detection,
who
though,
have
is what I'm
already.
trying to tell you.
Yeah, I mean, that's how all crime works. All crime is conditioned on detection.
Yeah, but you probably would understand that that's not really a good way to statistically analyze something to then take rights away from someone, or to take rights away from someone on the chance of like using a selection bias error that big, right?
Yeah, but you could say the same thing about fucking murderers and people who commit domestic violence.
My position is going to be pretty straightforward. The affirmative asks the judge to treat a legal label as if it were proof of personal danger. That move may sound firm at first, but it collapses under scrutiny. So a Schedule 1 drug user is not a medical diagnosis and not a finding of violence and not a judgment that a person is mentally unfit to own a firearm. It is a federal classification tied to abuse potential and accepted medical use, not with the person. That is a very different claim. That distinction matters because firearm restrictions are usually tied to specific legal or factual triggers, like in the domestic violence case we just heard, a restraining order or a violent conviction beforehand. So felony conviction, domestic violence, adjudicated mental incompetence, or other concrete findings. The law can recognize those as distinct categories for a reason. But they do rest on evidence, procedure, and identifiable risk, and not a smorgasbord of broad inferences based on many different categorical errors in statistics. So I'm just going to end it there, actually.
So, is it your contention that there is no statistical association whatsoever with drug use, drug dealing, being involved in kind of black market or criminal activity, and an increased risk of using a firearm in a dangerous or criminal way? That there's just
The
no association.
policing
It's
correlation
all
data,
just
the policing correlation data you're mentioning would show a heightened risk. Yeah.
But it's your contention that we should basically throw this data away because there's some
No,
other
that's
way
not
to
my
gather
contention.
data about homicides other than related criminality?
Can you not take drugs without doing a crime?
Can you kill someone
You
with
can't
a
really
gun?
murder
Can you
someone
commit a
without doing a crime, right?
exactly right? So then why would you disregard criminal statistics? I don't understand that.
Because it's susceptible to selection bias. We're talking
Okay, but
about Schedule 1 drug users, right? And just taking drugs, I guess you could say, has a criminal element to it because, like, I'm sure you're thinking of 18 U.S.C. 922, right? Which is, I guess, an unlawful user or anyone addicted to any controlled substance, right? But I just want you to know that the data that you're using here is based on, one, it's always going to be people who have substance abuse disorders. When it comes to the schizophrenic material and evidence that he was providing earlier, like Vigilante, and then all of this is going to be susceptible to certain selection bias. So I don't think we should make inference, like causal inferences on this now.
so some selection bias is something that every form of data will have. You mentioned that we could maybe
Correct.
look at like surveys of people, so self-submitted information. That will have a bias, right?
No, I was demarcating the difference. I didn't really say that we should have self-reported offending. I'm just saying that the evidence does rely on official records, which is going to be extremely susceptible to selection bias. It's not just a hand wave.
So what's an example of a data source that would not have any type of bias involved?
One that doesn't have like a system in which it conditions on detection, or the when you have a sample size that's not overrepresented, where these things co-appear in ways that police can observe. So
what's an example of that type of data source that we could use?
Are you asking me for what police can do, or how you can test this in a different way?
Yeah, I mean, if you don't like official records, well, I mean, if you say that the available data sources are not good enough to make a determination, somehow we have to limit public harm, but you can't seem to
I don't have to
name-
put one forward right now to show you how you can ban firearms from drug users right now. That is not my job.
Can I make a final?
Sure.
I know the time's over, but just ban or not ban, right? It could be a data source that refutes, right? I'm not asking for you to make a positive, like add some ammunition, pun intended,
I'm
right?
just
To my argument, but something that would
the
refute
argument here, right?
Right. So
we're just opening it up. Is that what we're doing?
Yeah.
Okay. I do actually have. I'm gonna posit something for you. Okay. So
Please.
there's a Supreme Court case. I'm not sure if you're aware of it. It's the one that allows domestic violence convictions, as well as if you have like a restraining order. There's a Supreme Court case versus Rahimi, where they would uphold a temporary disarmament of a person for subject to a domestic violence restraining order after a court found they were like a credible threat. Okay. Now, if you want my opinion on what we could do to try and see or test whether or not, or at least use some sort of analytical way to do this, it would be something similar to that, where you'd have to have like some analogical reasoning supporting it about the dangerousness of it in public policy. So for this circumstance, they'd have a different conviction that directly poses a credible threat. How you could actually go about doing that, though, I honestly don't know. But I do know right now, at least the Supreme Court has ruled that it's not analogous in this circumstance. For instance, this Rahimi case does not work in the Supreme Court's eyes, as well as my own eyes, when it comes to Schedule I drug users, because they don't reach that credible threat.
So there are reasons that somebody's gun can be taken away due to some kind of credible threat related to domestic violence,
right?
Or I forget the other category. Some circling back around to evidence when it comes to drug use. So we have evidence relating drug use and drug abuse to dealing, which is, but I think not controversially related to gun deaths. Something like 40% of homicides are related to, or gun homicides are related to drug trafficking.
Again, this is going to fall victim to a certain very wide range of statistical analysis errors. So
yes, so that's my question. Your claim is that basically we shouldn't implement some kind of safeguard based on this because this data has some form of biases. And my questioning,
it's not just some form.
I mean,
it does. I do want to say it does not prove the relationship between drug use and crime. Now, I can't say that's fake. There's definitely a relationship, right? Like a correlation, but we're talking about taking away rights, correct? And when we do that, we want to make sure that in the last case that we just mentioned, right, it needs to overcome some sort of credible threshold, right? And what's being presented right now is just not doing that.
So, I mean, do you have something to present to say that, official kind of criminal statistics are so biased in this particular manner on this particular subject that it's just not informative?
No, I just said that it does show a correlation, as in I cannot prove that the relationship you're talking about is not fake. But we have to meet certain standards when we want to take away people's rights. So it's not just simple bias, right? I mean, I can run through some of these for you if you'd like, but we have quite a few in this one alone. So we're going to run into something like the base rate distortion, conditioning on a collider, as well as a measurement validity problem, and then including the selection bias, right? So what that all means
Well,
Is
just
that
to jump, sorry, just to jump in, because that's already. I mean, there's always going to be issues when it comes to. So first of all, science never proves anything, right? There's, even in a court case, you have shadow of a doubt, right? Or you have preponderance of evidence, things like this, right? We don't look at proof beyond
sure?
some
But
possibility.
these are
right?
kind of statistically breaking biases, right? So like obviously when we do statistics,
what's
we
a
are trying
statistically
to reduce.
breaking
We're
bias?
trying.
In,
I mean,
in the
one of
case
these
of
on their
relating
own.
like drug use to
No, one of these on their own is
homicide.
not statistically breaking. Just to keep that in mind, but the overwhelming amount of them in this entire framework here, where it's tied to police records, like for instance, if we're going to use the collider one really fast, okay, I'll explain that one. The collider bias is going to happen when, let's say, both drug involvement and other suspicious or criminal-like circumstances are going to increase the chance of the police contact. And then you analyze the cases that entered the system in that now they have a condition common effect, correct? This on its own is not really like going to break some sort of statistical analysis, but it does lead into more of the other ones, like the measurement validity problem or the base rate distortion one, right? So if a data set, for instance, like drug users who get small criminal offenses, right? If the populations are already enriched from like criminal justice contact, which when we give people, drug using criminal offenses, right? I'm sure you've heard this before, but they become part of the system, correct? So they become more likely to actually engage in that very same risk offending violent drug use next to a crime with a police officer again, right? So all these different things are going to stack on top of each other.
Yep. So yeah, I didn't want to interrupt, but
I know, but we're past time,
that
so
I,
go ahead.
Yeah,
Go ahead and respond to that real quick.
Very quickly, the study that I sent was based on a self-report. So this actually is not at all some kind of police reports, policing, official records.
I believe I remember
this is actually
saying there
asking.
was a self-report inside of a jail, right?
I don't think it was. I can double check for you, but just to state as a final statement for this round, this is based on self-report. It's not based on official records. It's not based on police, like some kind of official policing or whatever. This is based on their own. And at the same time, every data source will have some form of bias. You've not been able to give me a source that is free of that. And given that, we must make public health recommendations based on the available data.
All right, real quick.
I can give you the domestic violence case where you can overcome that with like an analogous.
I mean, the whole reason I'm here is to refute your assertion. So,
but it seems like you're making a lot of assertions in the process.
Such as?
I don't know. Like the assertion that you disagree with me would assume, hey, Schedule 1 people maybe should own guns. Now that seems like an affirmative.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not going with the game here. Come on, man.
What game? I'm just trying to start conversation.
You're trying to bait me into shit that I'm not gonna get baited into.
You can.
Why do you think we should take away guns from people who have used Schedule 1 drugs?
Okay.
Right.
Do you think
I'm pretty sure the person.
Drugs?
Sorry. Go ahead.
Do you think there are certain Schedule 1 drugs, like you were saying earlier, that we should make like a special, like, okay, here are certain drugs ANCOM just does not like. ANCOM.
No, I think we should.
Okay.
I think we should be. I think we should be determining whether or not someone loses their Second Amendment right to keep and bear arms based on their likelihood, their or demonstrated likelihood of using that right to harm others or themselves, which is what things like red flag laws already do. So my my counter assertion is that you have not made a sufficient case to say that use of Schedule 1 drugs, which includes everything from pot to LSD to psilocybin to peyote to heroin to methamphetamine, this incredibly broad and diverse group of
but that
substances.
isn't that your argument? Then are there certain drugs within that you think big no here? There should be a drug test or something like that, and he shouldn't own a gun if he's doing like crack cocaine on the side of the street.
I think it should be based on their demonstrated likelihood of violence that may be correlated with their usage of a drug, but the usage of a drug is not in and of itself diagnostic of that violence.
How would you prescribe, like, oh, he's likely to be violent, he's a little violent boy? Skin color? Like, what are we going off of?
Behavior. Like we would for anything.
Okay, how are we supposed to... Okay, what's history behavior? How are we gonna... I'm buying a gun.
Have they shown a propensity for that sort of violence in the past? Because that is all we can use for this kind of thing. We're not fucking Minority Report precogs. We can't just predict crime before it happens. We literally have to base it on what have they done in the past and use that to determine what they are likely to do in the future.
Oh, fuck. Sorry. I dropped my phone on my foot.
Ow, that hurt.
No, what were you saying?
You heard what I said.
No, you were going on and saying, okay, we need to look at a history of action and we need to do background checks. And I was just letting you...
I said look at a history of behavior. I said look at the history of behavior. Do they have convictions of violence? Do they have demonstrated risks of violence?
Should be a part of that?
I think that drug tests could be a part. I do not think that they should be a primary or sole or even primary determining factor.
No one said soul. Where are you getting soul from? Jeez.
That the prompt.
But do you think...
I'm getting soul from the fucking prompt.
No, but it's not the sole reason that we're gonna... It's not the sole thing we're gonna look at. Like,
it literally says Schedule 1 drug users shouldn't be able to have firearms. That is a sole...
I didn't say it was the sole
criteria.
Background check that we should do before something. I'm saying, should drug tests be added on your background check of a person and saying, should they be ready to own a gun?
I'm fairly certain in a lot of places it already is. History of drug convictions certainly are.
What you coming at with, bro?
Yeah, so I mean, this is what we were trying to say. Like, we just continue what we already do with if you're in possession or on drugs and have a gun in your possession, you're going to jail. And then also, we should just do drug tests at the time of buying a gun. This is how those should be the mechanisms of enforcement on preventing people who are on drugs from getting a gun.
So you're saying that if an individual is caught with drugs and has a gun, then they're going to be barred from gun ownership?
Yes.
So if you have weed in your car in California and you have a gun, you're telling me that you are going to be barred from gun ownership with a straight face?
I mean, obviously, I'm of the opinion that weed shouldn't be considered a Schedule 1 drug.
But it is.
But it is currently. There is still, even the current president, as fucking shitty as he is, wants to make weed no longer a Schedule 1 drug. So that's...
Yeah, but that doesn't help your argument here.
Look, it's still unlikely to continue to be a Schedule 1 drug for very long. Because even Donald Trump wants to get rid of it being a Schedule 1 drug.
And he has not yet managed to accomplish that while you are trying to ban guns from over 30% of the population.
I mean, that doesn't mean... So like in doing this, like it doesn't mean that there wouldn't necessarily be a way for people to get their right to own a gun back. I mean, even now under the system that we have, where if you're convicted of a gun drug related crime, you can still get that felony expunged, and you'll be able to own a gun again.
Yeah, if you're a felon, that's what's going to happen. And if you're a felon, I'm going to say it's going to be more than just the drugs themselves. It was a different kind of crime that got you the felony status than just doing the drug in the first place. So what we've been dealing with this entire conversation is people that are committing or more predisposed to committing certain crimes or violent acts. Then you add the component of drugs to it. I'm going to need to see the correlation causation of these two things coming together to make it viable to amend the Second Amendment to say people should not have guns if they are doing these drugs.
Hold on, because I'm pretty sure so we already have rules around this where, like, if you're in possession of drugs while you're in possession of a gun, I'm pretty sure that's already a felony.
I'm gonna need you to tell me, because I know here in California, people have been caught with marijuana in their car, which is a Schedule I substance, with a gun. They can still own a gun. They never got a felony to remove their ability to own the firearm.
It might not be a felony in California, but it is a felony in quite a few states, including Texas. And
Texas
also
sucks.
Ohio.
I mean, as much as I hate guns, Texas is definitely the anathema to all people that love their rights. I'm not even going to argue against that.
I mean, look. So, like, when we talk about like the rules that are already on the book, like this is already a rule in the book. This is also a rule in the book that's not very heavily enforced. We can look at Hunter Biden, for example, where he was caught with a gun and got the gun charge for it, and that gun charge proceeded to be dropped.
Well, he already committed a crime in falsifying his gun permit. So the crime was already pre-existing. It had nothing to do with the drugs itself.
Part of the charges were not just the permit, it was also the possession of a gun while in possession of drugs. That was part of the gun charge. Because it is illegal. Because in most states, it's already illegal to be in possession of a gun while you're also in possession of drugs or on drugs. Like, this is already the norm.
So, as far as I understand, it was making false statements, false records, and illegal possession of a firearm due to those documents being fraudulent, not for drugs.
What state was he arrested in? Or no, these were federal charges.
Right.
Yeah, these were.
Which, to my understanding, the charge was dismissed, but that was following a pardon. But we're talking about this person getting convicted of committing fraud. So him being on the drugs wouldn't have been an issue had he not committed fraud while filling out the permit.
We all know the story of how Nixon used drugs to target certain groups. So my question to you is, if you agree with the prompt, how do you reconcile the prompt with the idea that the scheduling of drugs could be weaponized against certain groups and even ethnicities?
Yeah, that's a great question. This speaks to the conversation in the previous round where we're talking about the scheduling of marijuana specifically. I actually will accept that there could be some issues with the drug scheduling as it stands, that it doesn't perfectly represent the actual relative harm of different drugs, one versus another. I think it's likely that something like weed will probably be moved off of Schedule 1 pretty soon, given that we've gone from it not being that kind of popular to being legalized everywhere, to 2 presidents in a row saying, signaling to their bases that they want to get rid of it. So I think it will be moved off. In the meantime, somebody who is engaging in black market dealings, even if it's illegal for kind of silly reasons, they're still engaging with criminals, doing criminal activity. They're still getting closer to that world where there's a higher likelihood of violence.
It goes back to the prompt. This is something that you got into in your back and forth a little bit too. I just didn't get a clear enough defined answer. When you say users, give me a definition of what you mean. Do you mean some high school kid that stumbles into a party and does a line of coke for the first time? Or is this chronic users? How do you define this?
Yeah, I mean, it's going to vary a little bit drug to drug. A kind of casual social weed user might be pretty different than, I mean, somebody who's using meth or somebody who's using crack or somebody who's using like opium or heroin. It's a little bit, more common for somebody to use it, not very much. I've talked to somebody before who told me never ever try heroin because it's that good. Once can be enough. And so those people who maybe they didn't have any inclination toward any criminal activity, they get hooked, and then they start dealing because they need to keep getting that supply, and
Okay,
then they
so-
start defending turf, and then they start using guns in bad
With the
ways.
last couple of seconds here, so you're saying there's potentially some Schedule 1 drugs based off the criteria that you would say could even not bar somebody from not getting a gun, depending on the circumstances?
I think that the exact drug scheduling at the moment may not be the perfect world. We do have to go off of something, and we also can improve those at the same time. So we can use it as it is, and we can improve it to make it even better.
Yeah. Do you think other kinds of rights or privileges should be excluded for people that use Schedule 1 drugs, like owning a car or something like that? Like, should these tests be applied to like getting a driver's license?
I mean, I think it's plausible to do something like a drug test before a driving test, but certainly if you were driving a car and you were under the influence, then you would go to jail. So this does seem like very much in line with that. It's like you can maybe, you can walk around with a gun more discreetly than you could with a car, right? There's no way to kind of discreetly move your car around town without, using it and driving it. So it's a little bit easier to get away with having a gun in your possession at a given moment than it would be driving under the influence. It might be harder to get caught, but I do think that there is a parallel there, and they both can be very dangerous.
In your, I believe it was in your opening, you discussed the importance or relevance of violent tendencies over addictive tendencies. Those weren't your exact words, but that was sort of what I took from it. So you also simultaneously were talking about the inherent rights to gun ownership. So let me ask you, you stand against the idea of drug users being default barred from owning guns. Do you believe that domestic abusers should be barred? And to be clear, the reason I'm doing this is I'm just trying to test your consistency of, you understand why I'm asking. Okay, good. So do you believe that violent abusers should be barred from owning firearms?
Yeah, I agree with red flag laws in that instance. So if somebody has been convicted or has gone to court and it's been shown that this person has been violent, then giving them a firearm is probably a danger to themselves and others.
Everyone kind of on both sides agreed that certain use, like currently, could affect ownership rights. Do you think that would be the specific bar? And if not, do you think if intoxication increases risk, should any restrictions exist if people are intoxicated?
Not from banning gun ownership. People shouldn't be driving when they're under the influence, the same as they shouldn't be handling firearms. I can't think of any substance you can be under the influence of where it would be considered safe to be handling firearms.
All right, so Lethe, it sounds like you kind of weren't understanding 100% what Vidge was saying. At least you didn't answer the question how I wanted to hear, so I kind of wanted to re-ask it a little bit for you. What he's saying, essentially, my understanding is that we already have on federal forms, do you do drugs? And if you say yes to that, they won't issue you a drug permit, or you won't pass the federal background check. And if you say no and get caught lying, you can get arrested for that because we take it very seriously. And it's already illegal in most states to hold a gun while you're either on drugs or holding drugs. So do you understand what Vidge is saying? Is I'm not trying to do something extra constitutional here. All I'm trying to do is take a process that we already have and enhance the punishment.
I completely understand that aspect of it. If a person has done anything from having alcohol to have used a drug at some point, if they're no longer using that drug at the point in which they're filling out this application, so like in the case of Hunter Biden, like it was shown that he had the firearm while doing the drugs, the whole deal, he committed the felony in lying, he perjured himself. So that's the primary issue there. Had he just been doing the drugs, I don't think he would have caught a charge for it, but he also wouldn't have been allowed to own a firearm. For the reasons of, you've seen that this person is utilizing drugs while having the firearm and shown that they are a danger to themselves and others.
I know that you consider yourself to be a libertarian. I know that as a libertarian, you hold personal liberties to be sacrosanct.
I can answer.
I know that you hold them to be sacred, your inherent natural rights and such. So I would like for you to square the circle for me. How is it that personal liberties align with deprivation of rights based on life choices that do not directly influence other people?
Okay, so like, I'm not a good libertarian. Like, if the government has like licenses or regulations on them, I think we need to operate that system to its fullest extent, and I think that there should be certain like restrictions in how the government controls what it's able to do. And I don't think that, hey, just because I'm a libertarian, I believe in personal freedoms, da 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 da, that we should like misuse the systems we have in place. If the government has the right to regulate guns as it does right now, we should be able to regulate that in the way it should be regulated. Um, and because I think that there are certain negative consequences to having people who are strung on heroin on the side of the street, maybe if they walked into getting a gun and they're going to test negative for all the drug tests, I don't think they should have a gun, regardless of the personal freedoms they may be entitled to outside of in like pure anarchy or whatever you think I believe in.
What objective standard would you use or would the government use under your support to determine if someone is a user or not? And how long would that affect ownership?
I think if you've had past convictions with Schedule 1 drugs, that is a very good indication. I think a basic background check of like, okay, what's a criminal record? Hey, have you been found with a possession? Or hey, if you're gonna get your license, or before you buy a gun, hey, can you do a drug test real quickly? If we find you on any of these substances, hey, if you go in to get your license at one point and you have weed in your system, okay, you can't get your license, but that doesn't affect your future's place. And hey, if you're clean some other day and you piss in a cup and they don't find any weed, okay, you can get your license. Nothing like overly complicated.
One of the things that you mentioned was the fact that the vast majority of these Schedule 1 drugs or drugs that are considered Schedule 1 do not lead to violent tendencies, and as such, that was part of that was part of the crux of your argument as to why it shouldn't be relevant on the gun ownership. My question to you, though, is: do you agree that there can be firearm danger without violence? And if so, how do we prevent the potential from accidental violence from a person under the influence, even if they have no intentions of executing that violence?
All right. I first want to clarify what you stated was my initial statement. I don't believe that the vast majority of Schedule 1 drugs have no likelihood of, creating violent tendencies. I think many of them do, but not all of them. And the number of them with reduced likelihood for that is sufficient to make the overall question too broad. As for, can you?
How would you be able to? How would you be able to limit the potential dangers of gun ownership from people who are under the influence without barring drug users from owning firearms?
Gotcha. So I mean, it's kind of the same as I think someone else mentioned, having a driver's license. Driving a car while under the influence is also illegal, and we will revoke someone's license for or when we have demonstrated that they have done so. Now, a firearm is a little bit more what's the word I'm looking for? Intense, I guess, as far as, if someone under the influence uses it. But again, I think that it requires more than simply that they have used it. I think there needs to be at least some demonstration that their use of it has been irresponsible or in this way before we remove that right entirely.
Okay, so I kind of want to piggyback the last thing that Socrates said in his answer to you. Your argument was that this group Schedule 1 is vast and broad, and a lot of these critiques are off of a handful of the most dangerous and most addictive drugs among them. Would you accept that maybe in certain circumstances, because some of these drugs are so different and vast, that maybe this gun restriction wouldn't apply to those people because they wouldn't be increasingly more violent? That you'd have to tie in that this particular drug makes you more violent, like meth or crack or the distribution of these things in the black market. And also that you can also reschedule the drugs too.
Yeah, I think if laws were made to show that systemic, not just one-off, but, you have a history of using these drugs for specific substances, were to if that were to be enacted, fine. I am primarily against the broadness of the prompt because there are other drugs that are not in Schedule 1. Cocaine has been brought up multiple times. That is a Schedule 2 drug. Alcohol has been brought up multiple times. That's not on the drug schedule at all. So we need to do this on a substance by substance basis simply because the broad categorization of DEA scheduling doesn't give us a good rubric for likelihood of creating or enhancing harm.
You described the potential effects and negative impacts of drug use on the drug user that were of a concern to you regarding having the firearms. My question to you, though, and you specifically said in response to, I believe, ANCOM, what if a person's trip changed, right? That the person on LSD or psilocybin probably wasn't violent until suddenly they are, right? So
Yeah.
would you not agree that you described that the symptoms and manifestations you described are very similar to a person experiencing a stroke as well? And as such, is it not just as likely, or at least somewhat likely, that every single one of us here could suddenly have some sort of a, what was the word you used? Psychological break, I think, or psychosis. That's
Psychotic.
it. Psychosis. Yeah, psychosis. You couldn't. Is it not possible that all of us could suddenly experience psychosis without the use of drugs or alcohol?
I mean, yeah, anybody can experience psychosis. Psychosis is usually caused due to stress. But when we talk about like drugs and stuff, they increase the likelihood of psychosis because of the fact they inhibit the prefrontal cortex.
Okay, and I'm going to do what Tyler did earlier and kind of clarify the question based on your answer. So then, therefore, should we also ban stressful situations for gun owners? Or gun owners from having stressful jobs?
I mean, that's not really enforceable. Plus, all jobs are technically stressful, so then nobody would have guns. And the whole point of me being in favor of this is to not just straight up ban guns, but to limit who has access to them.
Go ahead.
I saw you making a couple of faces when Searka was talking. Maybe it was just my imagination, or maybe you were responding to what he was saying. But I kind of want to know your specific take on this. Not that Socrates is doing a bad job, But I feel like you're the team leader. This is your prompt. You're obviously going to do the best because you're the most passionate about it. So I'd say right now you're kind of leading your team. So Searka's making the argument effectively that all these crime stats that all three of you actually have been using are invalid because of they're susceptible to potential biases.
Invalid?
Not saying that they actually are, but they cannot be used because these potential biases in some degree could exist in this data. And then when Socrates pressed him about what can we use, he came with some vague stuff. My question for you is, why are the statistics you're presenting actually valid, if they even are? And if not, what would you say would be a better alternative to present?
Yeah, I mean, so the statistics, the majority of the statistics that I was using were from the Department of Justice. So I mean, like all statistics have bias. Like throwing statistics out because they have bias, we would never have any valid statistics. So utilizing the statistics that we have from credible sources like the Department of Justice is important.
If you think the legality should be based on like use of scheduled drugs, like Schedule 1, and the president has the authority to change that just by basing like an order to the DEA to reassess it, does that not change kind of how you view it if the president's able to kind of somewhat restrict people's gun rights based on like an arbitrary order?
I mean, that just calls to the arbitrariness of the scheduling system. We should have a more solid scheduling system that I would say, I mean, the DEA would obviously have to be in charge of it, but there should be a more scientific way of how we schedule drugs, not just based off of people's opinions.
My question for you. You were talking about the fact that a person's usage of drugs should definitely not be the thing that bans them or bars them from owning or having firearms, keeping and bearing firearms. But you did actually discuss substance abuse disorders. Do you believe that somebody who has been diagnosed as having a substance abuse disorder, regardless of the scheduling of the drug or substance they abuse, do you believe that people who are substance abuse disordered should be barred from owning firearms?
Okay, two things. One, so the law separates drug use from mental illness, right? And I just want to make that clear before I answer. And the answer is yes. If someone has a substance use disorder, then we have some form of contemporaneous or a comparable, maybe, depending on how severe it is, judicial account to then go ahead and enact the removal of the rights. Like in the case of the domestic violence Supreme Court case.
Yeah, this is a clarification. When your guys' time ended, Socrates got to go a little over to respond to you. And the gist of what he was saying, I wrote down, it's paraphrasing, so don't, Socrates, I'm not exactly quoting you here, but the gist of what he was saying is that you're calling his arrest data flawed, you're calling his self-reported data flawed, you're saying all these things are potentially susceptible to bias that you can't show me exist. All the data I'm presenting is bad and you can't present me anything. It sounds like he's, maybe not accusing you, but eliciting to, you're making a God in the gaps argument. So if that was something that was said to you just then, how would you respond to it?
Are you asking me?
Yep.
I mean, I would answer if that's what I actually said to him.
So clarify what you did say.
No, I mean, I don't have to answer that because Tyler didn't really represent my position at all. I
didn't ask a question about your position. I asked a question about what Socrates said to you in the time that elapsed after.
You paraphrased me in a way that I don't know how
that was a previous person's question that I paraphrased for. That's not what I asked you just now. Could you participate in the debate?
You want me to answer it with that framework in mind?
No, I was paraphrasing what you said for a different person's question. Now I'm paraphrasing what someone else said for your question.
Did I say it was invalid?
Yes.
I said his data was invalid.
You said that his data did not meet a certain threshold for you.
That is very different than invalid, man.
But this isn't about that. I'm asking.
I mean, how do you want me to answer this question? You want me to answer it like a real question, or?
Yes. If somebody said to you the argument you're making is the God in the gaps argument, you're saying all my data is so potentially flawed that we can't use it as strict enough criteria to take away somebody's rights. That's what you said. So if someone
In
said, and
statistics,
then he
we
said to
work
you,
from
what?
we reduce
Hold on.
statistical
You
stuff to
needed
make
an
inferences,
explanation.
right?
This isn't answering my question. You needed an
It's not, yeah.
explanation, so I'm explaining my question to you. What Socrates said to you in his last statement after he ran out of time to debate back, and you did not get a chance to respond to, he said, you're invalidating all of my data by saying it has these potential biases and flaws, so we can't use it because it doesn't meet your strict enough criteria to take somebody's right. When I asked you for data, you said you could not provide me any. You said you could not prove anything. So that also did not meet this parameter of strict enough to take away somebody's right. He said, basically, all the data I'm presenting is being invalidated by you. You can't give me any other data, but you're right. If he's accusing you of God in the gaps with that statement, which it came off to me as he is, how would you respond to that?
I'll give you another
can't
minute to
prove a
try
negative for
again.
one. You can't prove a negative for one, but there are here a better way to ask this. Okay, I'm going to answer your question, I promise. But like what I mentioned earlier with Horseradish's question, where I brought up the comparable judicial findings or like a contemporaneous record or misuse, violent conduct. Statistics like that could be used, or at least finding a data set from those ideas could help actually prove that I'm doing God of the gaps. But I mean, at the moment, it doesn't really matter if someone says I'm doing God of the gaps. It's just the statistical analysis going on here is just not good enough to make the claim. So that's my answer.
More of a clarification on how you're looking at the data being presented. I think something that Vigilante said earlier in his opening part of this was that, and correct me real quick if I'm wrong, it was something like 40% of crimes committed were by people under the influence, correct?
Something along those lines, yeah. There's a few. There's like a 2020 violence review.
Hold on. He was clarifying with Vigilante what Vigilante said. So good, Vigilante. What was that? What you said?
It could be the RAND
statistic. Was it
the RAND study?
Something like 40% of crimes.
It was the 40% of people in state in prisons and jails report that they were on drugs at the time of their offense. Yes.
Okay, so I think like more of Searka's reasoning here, and he can correct me now. This is kind of my question toward him. Would that, I think, reason more that a majority or minority of drug users commit crime?
I'm sorry. One more time.
That stat, 40% of criminals report using drugs while committing crime. That stat imply that more users or less users of a drug commit crime, like a majority or a minority. I feel like it would be minority, but you might be thinking of this differently.
Well, yeah, I mean, it might imply a lot of things, but that's not enough to make an inference, like a causal inference.
At the longest stretch, I think like you can imply that would mean that the minority of users commit crime. So why would you punish everyone? Like, why would you restrict everyone's right based on the actions of, say, 40% of users, maybe?
I'm not really. It's hard to hear you, so sorry. One more time.
Or if someone that got that could relay that.
Can you just repeat the question in like a new rephrasing for me?
Yeah, I'm trying to say that even the affirmative stats kind of imply that less drug users commit crime overall, like a minority of drug users commit crime. So why would you go and punish the majority of users, even if they were Schedule 1 drugs? Like you were saying before, what about all the people? Can they commit crime?
Oh, I see what you're saying. We can't make that argument. We can't do that argument either. You can't use statistics like to prove a negative that way, right? So the 60%, I think, is what you're saying, is majority of people who, when they are caught doing a crime, are not drug related. It's unfortunate, but I can't make that. I can't logically go on to say that to him and act like I can just get rid of 40% of crime with 40% of drugs related crimes happen with other crimes, right? The funny thing about statistics is that I can't actually go ahead and use that to my advantage. It would be making mistakes as well. So it would be wrong to say that the minority of people, when they commit crimes, are drug related or can use drugs but don't get caught with them. I guess it just doesn't make sense to do that.
All right, I'll start. Yeah, thank you so much, everybody, for coming to this debate. I feel like we heard a lot from both sides, but I feel like we really didn't hear any clear knockdowns for why we should be trying to improve public health. We've accepted that there's a number of situations where we do limit gun rates based on public safety. Maybe our stats aren't perfect in every way, but they never will be with public health. We live in a large country with a lot of things going on. There's a lot of unknowns, but this is why we try to reduce volatile situations. And people who are habitual drug users who can't stop using drugs for long enough to get out of their system to buy a gun, who are likely to turn into dealers that are likely to be involved in turf wars and represent a significant proportion of gun deaths. Maybe that's a circumstance where it's pretty reasonable to limit that. Just a note, I was looking back at my study that was looking at the self-polled, and this was not from a prison. This was based on a sexual risk reduction intervention, which is why the heterosexually identified methamphetamine users was in the title. Otherwise, that'd be an interesting headline. Right. So if we see this from official statistics, we see this from self-reporting in a circumstance that has nothing to do with the criminal justice system. If we kind of see this in every stat, okay, every stat has some biases, but if every source of statistics points to the same thing, it seems pretty reasonable to take that as the way that we move forward when we're developing our laws and to protect our citizens. Oh, we've got a yeah. And sorry.
Protect our citizens.
Right. Yeah. And when it comes to there were some concerns about which drugs are on Schedule 1, if that's totally fair. Those are things that could be updated in the future. But as well, we address that in terms of even if your activity is criminalized for a reason that's not justifiable, if you're in the underworld doing underworld dealings, you're still going to be involved in criminal elements. If you're becoming a dealer to fund your drug habit, then you're still subject to all of the dangers of gang violence, which is one of the primary causes of gun deaths. So if we're able to take away people's guns for domestic violence, we should do it for hardcore drug use and abuse.
Okay, so when we're looking at why people would be banned from using guns, there's always going to be an instance in which there is a crime that is committed, there is a conviction, and then removal of the weapons or the ability to own weapons is the circumstance that happens afterwards. So I'd rather not operate based on thought crimes. I don't know if people want to make new laws for states to force drug tests, but then there's ways to get around drug tests. Most drugs are out of your system before you would even take that test. So unless you are using on your way to go fill out your permits, you probably wouldn't have a problem. Except for in the case of marijuana, which is probably one of the most widely used drugs in America. And that's predominantly because they wanted to ensnare minorities and get them caught up. So with that being the case, I don't see where there's a correlation between people that do drugs and trafficking and gang violence, because not only gang members are doing drugs, not only people that are trafficking are doing drugs. So the drugs aren't the issue. It's the other illegal things that are being done in the process of whatever is happening that should bar people from being able to own drugs or guns. My apologies. Ultimately, if people are using drugs recreationally, responsibly, without any issues, I don't see why their ability to own a firearm should even come into question. But I'm going to leave that to everybody else, so I will end my time there.
Lethe made some arguments. I think my team made better arguments for sure. That's really where I kind of stand on this. I think overall we did make some pretty good arguments, some 10 out of 10 arguments. I think principally what good arguments, I must say. When ANCOM said, okay, like let's look at the differences. Let's say uh here's a broad and very huge category of describing drug users and drug use, with a whole bunch of psychedelics that seem nonviolent, weed included. Um, I think that is a fair and common assumption that you make whenever you hear, okay, let's look at Schedule 1 drugs and let's restrict people from using it. And like, okay, if I smoke once, here's what's going to happen. But I still think you can stand by the position of, hey, if you have a criminal record or you get drug tested, um, damn, we made some pretty good arguments. Um, if you get drug tested or you are found in possession, you have a criminal record connected to drug use and Schedule 1 drugs. I think that can be looked at in the same way as a mental handicap of, okay, here's a continued addiction. Some good ass arguments. Fuck. I'll cede the rest of my time.
Tonight, we've heard our opponents make a lot of statistical assertions, a lot of correlations, very little to show causation, and even less to demonstrate why a broad category of drugs that is based on the DEA's opinions regarding potential for abuse and the FDA's opinions regarding typical medical use, or rather therapeutic potential, why these categories are somehow a good rubric or metric for violence or potential for violence when using or abusing these drugs. That's the main issue with this entire argument. It is the broadness rather than the specificity. Sure, many of the drugs that are on Schedule 1 would, during their use and certainly during their abuse, increase potential for violence. But many of the drugs on Schedule 2, some even on Schedule 3, and alcohol, which is not scheduled at all and is the single most widely used drug in the entire country, all have equal or greater potential for violence. And unless there is a conviction related to violence associated with any of those substances, none of those by themselves typically are being argued for as as a reason to revoke gun ownership. So I think we need to be more specific. We need to be more intentional about our health and firearm policy, and we need to be making specific claims about specific substances and what they do. I also want to address, because I didn't hear anyone bring this up, we've heard a lot about drug testing in this in this debate. The problem with that is that the window for drug detection varies wildly, from a few hours to a few weeks, I think up to 6 months in some cases, depending on the method of testing, whether it's a blood test, a breath test, a hair test, right? All of these different drugs have very different detection windows. So we can't just limit it to a single drug test, because the method and detection a specific drug of or detected by that test could be very different. We need to be more specific in how we're detecting these things, more specific about what level of use is going to create the increased harm necessary to make that drug, specifically its usage, a good candidate for gun ownership removal, and also address what's the time limit on that. Sorry, I know I went a little over, but wanted to get my thought finished.
Yeah, so it's been mentioned multiple times on like the drug testing windows. So the drug testing windows do vary between drugs, but the whole point is to basically prove that you can stay off of drugs long enough in order to buy a gun. So with most drugs outside of marijuana, we're talking about a week's time frame that you need to stay off of drugs in order to be able to pass a piss test. And with all drugs, it stays in your hair follicles up to 90 days. So it's very easy to do. Like, if we want to just do a simple, cheap piss test, if you could stay off of drugs for a fucking week, you're probably not the person that we're trying to prevent from having a gun. As far as the statistics, I mean, those have been addressed a lot as well. I mean, the whole point of the statistics is to show the increase of violence, whenever it comes to people who abuse drugs and have substance abuse disorder, because that is very relevant here. As I had mentioned in my opening, like 80% of cases of child abuse involve drugs or alcohol. Like and as we know with statistics about abuse, a lot of the times abuse does lead to murder. And what's the number one way that people commit murder? Fucking guns. Look, the whole point is to limit violence. We want to limit deadly violence in particular. And while a lot of Democrats specifically want to limit that violence by just getting rid of guns in general, the better way to do so is to not step on people's rights in totality, is to limit who can have access to drugs, or who can have access to guns. Drug use, limiting due to drug use, is one step in doing that. You can argue that we also would need mental health checks, things like that. That's a completely different topic, though. The whole point is just to keep the guns out of the hands of people who are more likely to commit violence. And that's all we want to do, is just keep guns out of the hands of people who are more likely to commit violence. That's the best way within the system of rules that we have to prevent said gun violence.
Okay, so I'm just going to start with that. I think the affirmative in this case, in this prompt, is blurring lines that should remain separate. I want to start actually with something that might just be a little more educational, and could actually talk to Vigilante right now just a little bit. And that's the nature of the U.S. justice system in particular. We have a foundationally derived classical liberalism judicial system, right? And something that I want to just make clear is that we care more about not infringing on the rights of innocent people than we do about actually enacting retribution or trying to limit rights. So it's something that we kind of hold really highly in our judicial system. So we make sure that we don't end up with unintended consequences. But to win this resolution, the affirmative must do more than point to a few difficult cases. It must prove that the class as a whole should be barred from firearm ownership. That burden is heavy, much heavier than it sounds, I guess, from the debate. And some substances may correlate with serious psychiatric outcomes in some users, which we didn't really get to hear too much. And others do not show that pattern at all. In this case, cannabis would not be heroin, and heroin is not a psychedelic, and a category that is just as broad as just Schedule 1 wouldn't really do any precise argumentative work. And rights are not removed because a group seems troubling in the abstract, in the case of most of the data that we've heard. They are removed when risk is shown clearly, specifically and fairly, okay? That standard protects public safety, but it also protects principle. And on this resolution, the affirmative, I think, has not met that for me.